Welcome back. This is presentation 2 of Chapter 11, the Presidency. We're going to continue discussing the various powers of the President, and we're going to talk about some of the different institutions within the office of the Presidency. We talked a little bit about those kinds of powers that are clearly enumerated to the Presidency via the Constitution. There are also implied powers, and they are derived from Article 1, Section 8's necessary and proper clause. Presidents frequently justify their actions by invoking the Constitution's vesting and take care clause. And in essence, what they're saying is that because I am president, I have the power to do, this sort of thing that is in furtherance of one of the clear enumerated powers. So that's an example of sort of an implied power. There's a theory out there, the unitary executive theory. It's controversial. And it basically asserts that all executive authority resides within the person of the executive. And the implications of unitary executive theory are that Congress has little authority over the executive branch, and the president is a sovereign or supreme authority subject only to those specific restraints enumerated in the Constitution, such as Congress's control over revenues, its impeachment powers, and the power to override presidential vetoes. Proponents of unitary executive theory also believe that presidents have the power to interpret the Constitution as it applies to the executive branch. Critics of unitary executive theory argue that the principle of checks and balances provide Congress with powers over executive agencies through oversight authority and through Article 1, Section 8's necessary and proper clause. So again, it's controversial because it sort of upsets the whole idea of collaborative governance that is really at the heart of the system of checks and balances. The vagueness of the Constitution effectively creates this idea of an invitation to struggle over certain issues where both Congress and the executive have authority. And so, you have to have a certain amount of trust, and that's, of course, a resource that is not in abundance in American government right now. Delegated powers, again, these are the powers that are basically assigned to one government agency but are exercised by another agency with the express permission of the first. In this instance, most often we're talking about Congress creating an executive branch agency and then imbuing it with constitutional authority, which the president, of course, as chief executive officer, would have directing authority over. Many executive branches are not found in the Constitution, but there are, mentions of the Constitution of executive officers. So there is this presumption that Congress can create these executive agencies. This has been sort of a parlor debate within, among constitutional law scholars, with some more libertarian anti-government folks saying that there's nothing expressly, granting Congress the power to create all these different agencies. The delegation of power has been an inescapable consequence of the expansion of the size of the country and of the concomitant size of the government and the increase of government activity in the United States since the New Deal and since World War II, which launched America's national government in two directions, both in much more activist government, both domestically and internationally. The last really expansion of the federal government involved the congressional creation of the Department of Homeland Security in response to the 9/11 2001 terrorist attack. So it's been 23 years since there has been an increase in the number of executive branch agencies. And even in that instance, it's a bit of a misnomer because, in fact, DHS was comprised largely of pre-existing agencies that were then folded into DHS. Inherent powers, these are powers claimed by presidents that are not expressed in the Constitution, but are inferred from it. Most claims of inherent powers come in times of war or national security, while implied powers can be traced to powers expressed in the actual language of the Constitution. Inherent powers derive from this idea of national sovereignty. Under international law and custom, sovereign states possess several inherent rights and powers, the most important being the rights to engage in relations with other nations, to defend themselves against attacks from other states, and to curb internal violence and unrest. George W. Bush invoked inherent powers frequently in prosecuting the war on terrorism, which Bush used inherent powers to create military commissions, to designate U.S. citizens as enemy combatants, to engage in extraordinary rendition of captured suspects to U.S.-friendly nations willing to use torture against detainees, and over the National Security Agency to monitor telephone conversations between the United States and other nations. The Obama and Trump administrations similarly justified expansive assertions of executive authority on grounds of inherent power. It's these sorts of assertions of inherent power that Congress often attempts to rein in, to try and prevent what they consider to be monarchical assumptions of executive authorities. Presidents have many claims to institutional powers. The executive branch has expanded considerably over the course of history. The first great expansion, of course, was the result of the Louisiana Purchase, which roughly tripled the size of the federal government, led to the creation of huge territories that had to be governed. So again, the thousands of officials today and the staffers who work for, assist, and advise the president form what is known as the institutional presidency. And the institutional presidency dramatically expands the office of the presidency's capacity for action. Again, remember, that's staff equals capacity, greater capacity to do things, to do many things at once. So this is sort of a schematic of the president as the presidency as an institution. You have the White House staff. These are the folks who largely live in, don't live, but work within the White House. The independent agencies, including the Central Intelligence Agency, the Environmental Protection Agency. There's also government corporations. They exist and basically are doing things that the government wants done, but that really you don't think that private enterprise is ready to do. The executive office of the president largely works in a huge building across the street from the White House. It includes the National Security Council, the Office of Management and Budget, the Council of Economic Advisors. Those are sort of the big three. And then, of course, you've got the cabinet. They also, again, there are 16 or 17 of them now. And again, they are the largest bodies, and we'll talk more about this when we get to our standalone discussion of the bureaucracy. The cabinet, these are the 15 cabinet departments. They're the largest units. Each cabinet is led by a secretary and by deputies and undersecretaries who are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Cabinet departments vary significantly in size. For example, the Department of Education employs around 4,200 people, while the Department of Defense employs around 700,000 civilians, and then 1.3 million uniformed military personnel. So the Defense Department is the 800-pound gorilla of bureaucracy, if you will. It exists within the Pentagon, which is the largest kind of bureaucratic building edifice in the world. In addition to cabinet departments, the executive branch includes independent executive agencies whose heads report directly to the president. And these, again, they're created independently of cabinet departments for political or symbolic reasons. Examples include the Central Intelligence Agency and the Environmental Protection Agency. The EPA was really created just to get environmental policy out of politics because, again, it was created during the Nixon period. And it was a time when Republicans were just losing elections because of environmental concerns. And as the party of business, they were being blamed by a lot of that. So they really wanted to just make that issue go away. So that was a big part of the reason why they created the EPA. The White House staff, again, most White House staffers are analysts, advisors, and serve at the pleasure of the president. In other words, they don't have to be Senate confirmed. Most hold titles of senior advisor to the president or special assistant to the president. Nearly every advisor to the president is involved in message control, involved in crafting messages who are designed, that are designed to enhance the perception that the government is, that the president and their administration are on the job and are doing a good job. Key leadership positions in the White House staff include the chief of staff and the press secretary. The chief of staff's job really is to be kind of a gatekeeper, right? And again, they have potential to wield exceptional authority within an administration. Presidents who are prepared to be disciplined in their approach to the office allow their chiefs of staff to act as a gatekeeper, and they control access to the president and ensure that the right advisors have access to the president. Jimmy Carter attempted to act as his own chief of staff, and that simply failed. And in his last year, he had to bring on a chief of staff. Donald Trump went through 4 chiefs of staffs during his 4 years in office: Reince Priebus, John Kelly, Mick Mulvaney, and Mark Meadows, which really suggested an unwillingness on Trump's part to be disciplined. He really wanted to do whatever he wanted to do. The executive office of the president, again, it was created in 1939 because of the Brownlow Commission, which they issued a study that basically said that the government has gotten too large. There needs to be more sort of administrative bodies to help the president. The most important EPA or EOP agency is the Office of Management and Budget, which prepares the federal budget and acts as the government's financial watchdog. Historically, the budget process was a bottom-up process, with agencies passing program requests to clearance in the OMB. Today, the budgeting process is more top-down. The OMB sets the terms of discourse for agencies as well as for Congress. You also have the National Security Council, which is a department of the Executive Office of the President. It is comprised of designated cabinet officials who advise the President on national security matters. The National Security Council is headed by a national security advisor who manages the National Security Council staff, which I think under Obama there were over 200 NSC staffers. In some administrations, the National Security Advisor has played a significant role in foreign and military policy and promulgating and executing it. Another significant thing about the NSA is that they don't require Senate confirmation, and that was another point of concern with Donald Trump when he appointed a guy whose name escapes me, a former general, who frankly a lot of people believed was a national security threat, and who had to resign with like 23 days into Trump's presidency. You also have the vice president, which is a part of the office of the presidency. The constitutional purpose of the office is to succeed the president in case of death or incapacity, and to preside over the Senate and cast tie-breaking votes when necessary. Remember, the Senate is always comprised of an even body, so there's always the possibility of a tie. Historically, the vice president's value came as an electoral resource. Candidates who win their party's nomination often will select a running mate most likely to unify the party and maximize turnout among party regulars. Nominees may select a second-place finisher in the primaries to unify the party, or they may seek to balance the ticket. If it's a northerner picking a southerner, if it's an easterner picking a westerner, if it's a liberal pick a moderate, if it's a conservative pick a moderate, and so forth. There have been 8 vice presidents who have replaced presidents who died in office, and only one president rose to the presidency due to the resignation of a president. That was Gerald Ford, who assumed the presidency due to the resignation of Richard Nixon. There was some controversy when John Tyler assumed the presidency upon the death of William Henry Harrison in 1841. That was the first situation. The Constitution's vagueness on the vice president's constitutional status created some controversy that Tyler simply overcame by asserting, I'm the president now. So the 25th Amendment codified the tradition of vice presidential elevation in the event of a presidential vacancy, and provided for a process for replacement of the vice president in such a case of an elevation. That process allows the president to nominate a replacement vice president subject to the controversy, to the confirmation by a majority of both houses of Congress. Gerald Ford was the first vice president to come to office via the 25th Amendment. And he was picked largely because he was a member of the House, and he was relatively well thought of across the aisle, and Democrats controlled the House of Representatives at the time. So that's it for this presentation. When we come back, we will continue our discussion of the presidency. I'll see you next time.